Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to decode the ultimate masterclass in solving high-stakes, ridiculously complex problems. I'm talking about American military battle planning. Look, whether you're running a global corporation, a kind of chaotic startup, or honestly just trying to manage a massive logistics puzzle, understanding how the Department of Defense wrangles pure chaos into precise execution, it's absolutely invaluable.
Think about it for a second. It is a monumental challenge to organize the world's most complex organization in the face of a global crisis. The operational environment is never simple, and it's certainly never static. So, how exactly do you plan for the truly unpredictable? How do you align thousands of troops and immense logistics when a crisis just erupts overnight, the enemy gets a vote, and conditions are literally changing by the minute?
To understand the military's structural response to all that uncertainty, we're going to follow a pretty straightforward agenda. First, the anatomy of battle planning. Second, framing the military mission. Third, wargaming and developing options. Fourth, finalizing the operation order. And finally, adapting to the chaos.
Okay, let's dive into part one, the anatomy of battle planning, where we look at structuring the unknown. We're going to look under the hood at the core engine that drives all military strategy.
The absolute foundation of this entire system is the Joint Planning Process, or JPP for short. Think of the JPP as this rigorous, heavy-duty filter. It takes really vague strategic goals and transforms them into clear, actionable operations. It's the analytical methodology that underpins planning across, the full spectrum of operations. It allows commanders to cut right through the fog of war and build a tangible path to victory, even when the situation feels totally out of control. By formalizing this thought process, the military guarantees that no critical variables are missed when the pressure is really on. So, there are 7 distinct steps to the joint operation planning process. From planning initiation all the way down to plan development, this sequence forces planners to tackle problems systematically. But, and this is crucial, this isn't just for long-term theoretical wars. It's specifically designed to structure contingency scenarios. We're talking rapid, high-stakes responses to sudden global crises, where time is literally the ultimate luxury. Whether the military has a year to prepare or exactly 48 hours, this 7-step process is the mandatory pathway to get things done.
Now, what's fascinating is that the military uses this exact same 7-step framework, but at 2 entirely different speeds. You've got deliberate planning, which happens during steady-state, non-crisis conditions. That's anticipating what might happen years from now, like a hypothetical conflict or a massive natural disaster. But then you have crisis action planning. That's for those unpredictable contingencies. When a sudden emergency strikes, these exact same steps are accelerated, compressed, or even run simultaneously to get actionable options to decision-makers right now. The framework itself doesn't change, the velocity does. It's elastic enough to stretch over months or snap right into place overnight.
Moving right along to Section 2, framing the military mission through strategic guidance. Let's focus on the very beginning of this monumental task. To keep things simple, we can group the first 2 steps of the process under their broader function, strategic guidance. Step 1 is planning initiation. In a contingency scenario, this kicks off the second an appropriate authority, say the President or the Secretary of Defense, recognizes an emerging crisis and directs the military to act fast. Then we hit Step 2, mission analysis. This is where planners separate hard facts from assumptions to define the exact problem. Because in a rapid response, identifying what you don't know is honestly just as critical as identifying what you do know. During mission analysis, commanders aren't just sitting back taking orders. They are independently dissecting the environment. They evaluate known facts and assumptions, but more importantly, they pinpoint operational limitations, resource constraints, and, this is a big one, actions they are explicitly prohibited from taking. By the end of this step, they produce a refined mission statement and critical information requirements. Essentially, they are building the exact boundaries of the sandbox they have to plan. And that is absolutely vital when a rapid crisis leaves you with zero margin for error. All right, Section 3, wargaming and developing options, also known as concept development. Once the problem is clearly framed, we transition into what is definitely the most dynamic phase. Before we tackle the next few steps, we really need to understand a term called the course of action, or COA. A COA is basically a proposed solution, a potential way to actually accomplish the assigned mission. Now, notice the plural nature of this idea. Planners don't just draft one single solution, no way. Even in rapid contingency planning, when the clock is ticking loudly, they generate multiple distinct options. This gives civilian and military decision-makers real flexibility. For example, they might build a high-risk rapid strike option, a slower methodical option, and maybe a stealthy limited footprint option.
So these next 4 steps all fall under that concept development umbrella. In step 3, planners build out those multiple COAs. Then in step 4, they analyze and wargame them, really stress testing the options against potential enemy reactions. Step 5 is COA comparison, where they objectively weigh the risks and strengths of each alternative. And finally, in step 6, the commander approves the absolute best path forward. In a fast-moving contingency, this might actually mean taking the best elements of 3 different rushed COAs and mashing them together into one hybrid solution just to save precious time.
I have to say, the absolute highlight of Step 4's wargaming phase is the introduction of the Red Cell. This is a highly specialized intelligence team, and their sole purpose in life is to think exactly like the enemy and ruthlessly try to break the plans before they ever see combat. Imagine if your entire job was to aggressively and imaginatively hunt for your boss's vulnerabilities. By accurately portraying the adversary's worst-case capabilities, the Red Cell provides the ultimate intellectual stress test. They make sure friendly forces aren't just walking blindly into a trap.
That brings us to Section 4, finalizing the operation order, or plan development. Now that a single, battle-tested course of action has been chosen, it's time to put it all in writing. So here we are at plan development, the 7th and final formal step of the JPP. Here, the abstract approved idea is transformed into a highly detailed operation order. You'll often hear it called an O-plan or O-board. The planning staff rapidly expands the chosen course of action, locking in the resources, the logistics, the personnel, and the intel requirements into one massive unified directive. And remember, in a crisis scenario, this document has to be comprehensive enough to be pushed down to frontline troops immediately so they can just execute. The real centerpiece of this final plan is the concept of operations, or CONOPS. It clearly dictates to everyone exactly what's going to be done, when it'll happen, and how all the massive logistical puzzle pieces fit together. A well-written CONOPS dictates the tempo of the operation and sequences forces into the area. It links tactical, boots-on-the-ground actions directly to the overarching strategic end state. Ultimately, it ensures every single subordinate commander understands not just their own mission, but how their specific piece fits perfectly into the massive machine of the joint force. And finally, Section 5. Adapting to the chaos through plan assessment. This is where we reach the reality check of our explainer. What actually happens when the plan goes into action?
Well, planning definitely doesn't stop just because the bullets start flying. Commanders use continuous plan assessment to figure out if they need to adapt their strategies based on what the real-world environment is throwing at them. They use something called the RATE methodology. Basically, they're continuously evaluating if they need to refine, adapt, terminate, or execute the plan based on changing conditions. It's an ongoing, real-time feedback loop. This proactive assessment is exactly what stops leaders from just blindly reacting to the chaos and allows them to confidently steer through it instead. Which brings us to a pretty profound final thought. There's an old military adage you've probably heard: no plan survives first contact with reality, or with the enemy. So if the doctrine itself openly admits that the operational environment is entirely volatile and that initial plans constantly fail, why go through this massive, incredibly detailed 7-step process in the first place?
Because this incredibly thorough process isn't actually about perfectly predicting the future. It's about building the deep situational understanding, the war-gamed options, and the structural agility to pivot and win when the unpredictable inevitably happens. As Dwight D. Eisenhower famously said, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. By the time a sudden contingency hits, the leaders already know their resources, they've debated the worst-case scenarios with the Red Cell, and they share a common language to adapt instantly. It is literally a masterclass in structured adaptability. So think about your own business or your own chaotic projects. Are you just guessing at the future, or are you building the framework to adapt to it? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.